It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. Joining me on the show for a second time today is Doyle Slayton. He's the CEO and founder of Xoombi. Doyle, welcome to Accelerate.
Andy, thanks so much for having me again.
Well, yeah, I should have said welcome back again. So for people who hadn't heard your first appearance on the show over a year ago, may fill them in a little bit about yourself and Xoombi.
You bet. I appreciate it. My background is primarily in sales. I started on the front lines, cut my teeth in advertising. I was in sports broadcasting and started selling. Had to sell my own ads in order to get my games paid for and on the air. So my natural tendency was cold calling and prospecting. I just back then built a list on a tablet and started hammering the phone and called until I found 10 advertisers who would, pay $1,000 a year to sponsor the local high school, and off we went. And I guess I realized at that point that sales was for me, interestingly enough, that it was for me based on cold calling experience.
which is usually when people find out it's not for them.
That it's not, right. So I was the opposite. But I also realized in that same vein was that when I had other teammates that had to, that were maybe helping with broadcasts, et cetera, that would come in and try to sell, they did not enjoy that process, and they did not naturally gear themselves toward picking up the phone and finding prospects with just cold calling. So that's when I realized, wow, maybe this is something that I can get pretty good at and eventually help people and teach people how to do it more effectively and that sort of thing. So, continued my career in sales with a lot of outbound prospecting, moved into management and director positions, and ultimately, as time passed toward more of the what I'll call modern age of selling, what I realized was, this thing has changed. It's a lot harder to get people to pick up the phone. They don't answer the phone anymore. That's number one. And if a guy like me that has a natural inclination to cold call and a desire to do it, in other words, in the morning when I was going to work, Andy, I'd literally be walking as fast as I could to get to my desk because I wanted to start the day with my first 10 to 20 calls and get those under my belt as a sense of accomplishment that I got activity going, right? I mean, that was my burning desire to get in and do that. But, even with a guy like that, I started realizing, man, nobody picks up the phone. And if it started to bother me, everybody has a breaking point, and mine was pretty long down the road. But if it started to bother me, and I knew the turnover that was happening in sales, I realized there's a problem. There's a problem out there, and we've got to find a way to solve it. So that's how I started recognizing things like we've got to help people, not just with telling them, go get on the phone. That doesn't help anybody or motivate anybody. We've got to help them build their prospecting list. We've got to help them with the types of assets that they have available to them so that they can have more meaningful calls and emails and follow-up attempts on cold prospects and on prospects who are already deeper in the sales cycle. So that's how I never expected. I was the type of guy, I don't need marketing. I'm just going to hammer the phone. But that's when I realized, listen, I can be a hybrid marketer and create this type of concept and methodology where it's about both marketing and sales and strong alignment and understanding how each one needs to think in order to help sales produce results. I mean, that's what it comes down to,
Sure.
Andy, is marketing is there to help sales, not the other way around. And sometimes, it's a pointing finger back and forth, but marketing as a marketer, I just say, hey, I've got to humble myself and go to sales and say, listen, what are my leads saying when you call them? How do they respond when you email them? What types of things can I do to help set you up better for that call? If marketing is willing to humble themselves to do that, I think it'll help a lot of people be more successful.
Yeah, so I was going to say, is it just me, or is there something about the term smarketing that just doesn't, I know people use it a lot, the personal thing just doesn't resonate very well with me. Maybe I would think of smarketing, I hear the word smarmy behind it, which is, is the way people think about salespeople, right? So it's like,
sure.
That word association.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I would take that word in too much context. I probably just slipped it in there. Ideally, it's more about alignment of Absolutely. Thought, alignment of process, and making sure that your marketing activities are aligned with what sales is doing. It's got to be about both right now in this current marketplace. It's got to be about both inbound and outbound, right? And at the end of the day, when it comes to inbound, it's what inbound does more than anything, especially in B2B, more complex sales, is not to get someone to come and write you a check, because it's just not going to happen. The solutions and the deals are too big. So it's all about brand lift, awareness, and ability that when a salesperson prospects on a client or is referred into a client, that they're willing to talk to you because they've heard of you before and they've heard good things about you and they've read your content and like the way that you think and want to do business with you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the inbound piece is really, really about. And then the outbound piece is making sure that your salespeople are prospecting on good prospects. I mean, you can't open Hoovers and drop 1,000 prospects into somebody's database and just say, "Hey, go call them." Those sales teams don't succeed.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, that's where the sort of, they said, the alignment between inbound and outbound has to happen. Is too often I see sales teams that are basically forcing their inside reps or their proactive outbound reps to build their own lists. And in cases like that, yeah, you tend to have people taking sort of the path to least resistance, to find names so they can call. And it's, we're starting with garbage, as you talked about. It's the whole garbage in, garbage out thing.
Yeah. And so that's where I think that's where a lot of companies are right now, Andy, top to bottom, is I think people are just trying to figure out what works. And they're so inundated with people telling them, that cold calling is dead, or that's not, that salespeople are no longer going to be needed, or that inbound doesn't work, or you've got all these people telling you what works and what doesn't, but they're not really on the front lines doing it. And so the key component has got to be a combination, and they're trying to figure out what works. And you hear the term sales stack, and they're trying to figure out how to stack things up to make things more efficient. I think the key is that you, in that process, don't make your stack too deep, because it's got to be simple.
Well, yeah, so, but there's a lot of I don't say pushback, but I mean a lot of visibility being given to the idea right now or the facts that, yeah, sales stacks perhaps, and referring to the stack of applications or technologies that you use to help make your sales more efficient and effective, that perhaps it's reached a point where it's gotten out of control a bit, and that they're, in an effort to become more effective and more efficient, their reps and managers are more on the rep side, I think, starting to try everything, right? Try anything. Mm-hmm. that will help increase the predictability of what I'm doing.
Yeah, and after a while, you run out of time.
Well, yeah, and also, as you said, if you have alignment issues, if you've got a sales stack that's out of control, you're not going to have necessarily alignment between sales and marketing, as you may not have alignment between what management thinks is happening with the sort of official blessed sales stack, 5 to 7 applications they might be using according to surveys, versus the 11 to 13 applications the people on the sales floor in the field are using.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I put together a little list as I was thinking through it, and to me, there are several things that are must-haves, right? And I'm interested in getting your thoughts on this. But
sure.
The first thing is we talked about list building, but you've got to be able to build a high-quality list with your ideal target accounts and have those narrowed down very nicely as to who is most likely going to be willing to do business with you from a corporate standpoint. And then within those companies, you've got to identify the ideal buyer. Buyer persona is the most common term used today, right?
And there'll be multiples.
Yeah, and you want to have at least 2 to 3 at the very least. If the average people involved in the mix of a decision is somewhere between 4 and 7, depending on the size of the company, right? Then I want to start with the ability to have at least 2 to 3 prospective contacts in the database, especially when people don't answer the phone or respond readily.
Mm-hmm.
And so then once I've got my list, I think we've talked about this before, but I like to start sales reps with about 100 accounts and get them working through a lead management process that'll ensure that leads don't fall through the cracks. Once they've got all 100 in motion, we give them another 100, and once they've got all 200 in motion, then we'll give them another 100 if they can handle that. And depending on, again, the size of the business they're working for and the complexity of deals they're working, that may be their limit. Some may be lower, some may be higher, et cetera. But the point is that list building is the first key, and in that process, you've got to save people time. I mean, you talked about, you mentioned it a moment ago in passing, direct dials are gold, and email addresses are a must, right? And so in that process also, marketing automation can be working in the background, warming these prospective clients up, and ensuring that when these salespeople reach out, that they've already heard of us. From there, having some sort of lead scoring methodology, even if it's simple, to be able to distinguish between those prospects who are somewhat engaged versus not engaged at all. And the somewhat engaged, you continue them down the marketing automation path until they become more on the highly engaged and have salespeople start to reach out at that point for sure.
Yeah, and there are some good tools to that point about lead scoring. New tools coming out like Sales Wings is one, if you're familiar with them, where it's really sort of a sales-oriented predictive lead scoring application that is very simple. And, basically you get, and it's meant for top of funnel. So it's really meant to say, okay, here's somebody, they do hot, warm, and cold, basically, is the categories you put in. And hot meaning hot, you should call them today based on the activity that they've undertaken in terms of looking at your website and so on. And so it's a great little tool to say, okay, you got your list of 100, but which one should I prioritize calling today? And so this new generation of lead scoring, I said Sales Wings is one of them, that gives a sales rep, just based on activity that's happened with that prospect. As you said earlier, if marketing's been doing their job, they should at least be aware of who you are when you call. This will tell you how aware, how engaged they are before you call.
Yeah, I'm going to check them out. I have not heard of them, but I'm on their website now, saleswingsapp.com.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, most of what we do is in HubSpot, so we use that platform, obviously, to manage our CRM and our marketing automation. But I always like looking at this tool because some of our clients are not, are not open to taking on a full application like HubSpot. So having these little tools is helpful on the side.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah, I think one of the things that strikes me a little bit about what you're talking about, but it's also been a topic that has been a topic of discussion with other guests, and as I've been working on projects that I'm working on, is that we are I don't know, we're getting better at understanding how our process works. Yeah, our sales process. We could be able to collect data. We've got many more data points to collect and to analyze and to look at. But the thing that still seems to be missing for me is a real understanding of why it works. And so we have this sort of bifurcation, if you will, around this term, sort of the science of selling. And for some people, it's all about, we're going to look at our data. We're going to look at what we've done. We're going to, split test the heck out of this thing. We're, test this email versus that email, this voice message or that voice message, so on and so forth. And we're going to get these results to say, okay, these things work. But what seems to be missing is what I call sort of, and not just me, but other people call it, the science of selling, which is the real science that researchers in the lab have analyzed and proven. People have won Nobel Prizes based on about, the social psychology, behavioral economics, about influence and why people make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, we got to bring these together. They can't be one or the other, right? Because they both complement each other. But it seems like we're sort of moving down paths, at least I see, where people are sort of like all one or all the other.
Sure. Well, definitely. I think we've got one client who we've worked with who is all about, if you go to Program on Persuasion, the science of selling around making decisions based on emotion. And for the industries that they work on and work with, that's the science of selling is geared toward how the brain makes decisions based on emotions. So the training that they work on is very much based on that side of things. But then we have another client, ROI Selling, who's all about value selling and value calculators and presenting a business case based on expected return on investment, and can break down very specifically the non-emotional side of what it's going to do for their business and the break-even point and all of these things that are important to selling based on value, right? So yeah, I think that's another piece of the puzzle that people are in some cases working on, and if they're not, they should add it to the mix. What are some things that you've seen out there that tie into this topic?
Well, I think there's more, I don't know, more exposure being given to this whole idea about we'll say the emotional side, the intuitive side, the psychological drivers that influence how we make decisions, and that at some level are probably almost encoded at a DNA level within us, or a genetic level within us, just given the thousands of years of how we've evolved as humans. And I think more attention needs to be paid to that. And that's really sort of the focus of certainly alluded to that in my two books, but I mean, there are other books, obviously, very famous book by Robert Cialdini called Influence, and his follow-up book, Persuasion, which is a great book people should read. There's a brand new book out by a gentleman named David Hoffeld called The Science of Selling, which is all about, it's not about the data of selling. It's all about, the behavioral economics that we talked about, social psychology, about how we've been built as human beings to make decisions. And so I think salespeople, what I see missing, as I said before, is salespeople have to understand, our past history in terms of what works and doesn't work, absolutely essential. We need that information, but we need that in itself is not what causes people to buy. And so what causes people to buy is based on this other side, right? It's how they're influenced to make a decision, what things influence their decisions. We got to bring these together, and if we can effectively find a way to bring them together, it's application based. I know some people are working on, or just better. I don't necessarily call it training, better education of our sales reps to be aware of these factors. Then the possibilities are limitless, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're kind of on the same wavelength, because earlier I was just jotting down notes as I had ideas come to my mind. And now that I look at that list of things that I wrote, it applies specifically to this. And just generally speaking, what I listed here is that the thing that salespeople need to be very, very good at. How many people just try to go straight for the demo, right? And when they demo, they're just going through a canned pitch. And I wrote a post on this. You can find it on our blog. Sales demos where deals go to die, right? And it's because once you've baked all your cookies and shown your demo in the cookie cutter way that you show everybody, you haven't really identified any real problems or current initiatives that the company is focused on. So,
right.
So we've got to be really good at identifying those problems and current initiatives that people are being held accountable to at work. And then the second thing is, and this ties to the emotional piece, is you've got to get, and we've heard it before, but people aren't very good at it. You've got to be good at differentiating yourself, because it is an emotional feeling that people get when they hear you say something and their thought is, I've heard that all before. Everybody says that. That's the worst thing that you can have someone tell you, is everybody says that.
Yeah, well, right? That's one of the beauties of Cialdini's new book, Persuasion, which talks about that. Really, what you do is if you're the adept communicator, what he calls the savvy communicator, basically telegraphs what they're going to be talking about, and telegraphs the importance of what they're going to be talking about, so it becomes important to the listener before they say it. And yeah, I mean, differentiation that's one of the ways you do differentiate yourself. And when people form these perceptions, and you'll read other books by Kahneman and others about how various systems of thinking we have and how our emotions play into that. We as humans are sort of programmed to want to make decisions in sort of the easiest manner possible. And so this early differentiation really becomes so key, because if people want to make the good enough decision, they don't want to overinvest in making decisions. So the ability to differentiate yourself earlier in the sales process and create these strong impressions in the mind of the buyer, which are really hard to shake. I mean, again, research shows first perceptions are very sticky. So if you can make positive first impressions or perceptions, then your ability to win the business goes up fairly substantially. Now, that can be integrated with the process. So that's the emotional side of selling. That can be integrated with your process if we're educating people how to do it, so that when they go through their process and they have that opportunity to finally engage with a prospect, they're much more effective, while conversion rates will go through the roof. Yeah.
And at the end, what you've got to be able to do is inspire action, right?
Yes.
And that's the thing, because what's the biggest competitor we most often lose to is the status quo.
Absolutely.
So we've got to be able to inspire action. So then I started thinking, how do we do these things? I mean, how do we teach people to identify real problems, differentiate, and inspire action? So I put a few other bullet points, and we'll see what I missed here. You can help me fill it in. But I think the first thing is, at the most basic level, and this ties into the emotional piece that you mentioned, is you've got to look the part. You can't go to somebody's website and they look like it was built in the 90s, and they just don't look. If they're a technology company, they don't look innovative. So people have to get up to speed on that, and I don't think most people like to have to worry about rebuilding their website, but looking the part is a key factor. There's got to be, and this might be an outdated word, so we might need to pick another one, but there's got to be a cool factor to what you're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where people are inspired to say, man, this is really neat. I like what they're doing. This is something that I've been thinking about, and why didn't I, launch something like this?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about piquing people's sense of curiosity, right? So it could be an air of mystery. It could be scarcity, right? So you're creating an artificial scarcity that induces people to look further into it because they don't want to miss it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then, the third thing is efficiency. You've got to be able to show that you're going to be able to help them execute both with financial efficiency and activity being efficient as well. And I'll give you an example. I won't mention the name of the company, but I gave them this feedback, and that is that I can tell by going to somebody's website what technology this company is using. If it's any way associated with their websites. So I can tell if they're using Marketo or HubSpot or Pardot, or if they're using Google Analytics or AdRoll, or any of these applications within their stack to capture leads and to do their marketing.
Right.
And the challenge with this platform is that I have to jump through hoops to get from point A to point B. All I want to be able to do is, once I've identified, listen, I like this account, I want to work it, boom, let me drop it into my CRM. I don't want to have to, send it to a list that later I go to another 2 or 3 screens to get to then drop my whole list into a spreadsheet to then import into my CRM. That's too much work to do, and it's not efficient. I want to be able to work on the fly. So if I'm focused on one account, researching their site and where I can potentially help them, I need to drop them into my CRM immediately, start my calling and email sequences, and move on to the next one, right?
Yeah,
That's
right. And there's applications out there if you're doing that, you can drop it into your list, which automatically updates your CRM.
Mm-hmm. So efficiency is key, right? And then I think the next thing that people, and you mentioned this earlier, is people want to know that they're not over investing or jumping in too deep with you if they're not sure yet, because everybody's confused about what works and what doesn't, is you've got to have social proof and case studies and things that can specifically identify a solution that you provided to someone else with a similar problem who's showed specific gains and returns that you can do for this client as well. So I think the thing that we've been moving to with some of our clients also is developing case studies and social proof to help salespeople be more convincing, right? And then the last thing is an easy point of entry, right? Is people want to be able to try before they buy, and not get locked in. We started off saying, well, listen, there's so much work involved with the types of marketing and sales initiatives
mm-hmm.
and strategies that we're going to build for you. We really only sign 1-year contracts. Well, unless someone knows you pretty well and has worked with you in the past, you've got to be flexible enough to say, well, we're willing to do 6 months, or let's run a 3-month pilot, or let's do a trial, right? And get creative enough to the point where you show them how to do what they need to do. Let's say you're a software application, that you teach them how to get so in tune with the application that there's no way that they wouldn't want it.
Mm-hmm.
So those were the notes that I was thinking about earlier as I was considering the elements that would help people identify problems, differentiate, and ultimately inspire action. What are your thoughts on that?
Long list there.
I'm a bullet point kind of guy.
You're
Andy.
a bullet point type of guy. Yeah, I mean, there's no arguing with anything there. I think that what I would focus on, and for people listening, is this inspiring people to take the journey with you, right, is that we really have to stop. There's still some number of sales professionals among us who still treat sales as being somewhat adversarial in terms of what you're doing. And, maybe there's some businesses that might work. I'm not aware of what they are. You're always going to have more success if the customer feels that you are with them, right? I mean, that's ultimately what we're trying to do is have the customer think that we are this trusted advisor, that we're not just, we're just not an advisor, but we're actually, we're almost part of their decision-making process. And if you can transcend that, right? If you can deliver the value to them early in the process, so that you start building that relationship and that rapport and that trust, then they're inspired to take that journey with you. And that becomes the ultimate challenge, I think, for salespeople. And again, this gets back sort of the emotional side of buying, is that the intellectual side, if you will, is that studies are fairly conclusive, is that people are much more likely to do business with people, not just that they think are like them, but they actually think, and then Cialdini talks about this in Persuasion, is that are of them, right? So it's like being part of the family versus being an outsider that they like. How do you make yourself part of that family in the mind of the buyer?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of those examples is oftentimes, and I don't necessarily do this. I mean, I do it consciously, but I really feel it, right? And that is that when we're working with our clients and I'm on calls with them, I talk in terms of we when I'm talking about their company. Mm-hmm. And I, because I really do feel bought into that. That's one of the things we look for also is, what are some companies that would be really passionate about what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish and would want to help these companies grow, right? So that makes it a lot easier to be in it with them than to just say, hey, let's just take these actions to, create marketing campaigns and sales best practices, and then you do with them. It's up to you to execute it. Listen, I want to be involved in what you're doing because I'm passionate about it. So
exactly.
I mean, that really resonates as you describe it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Doyle, we're moving into the last segment of the show where I've got some questions I ask all my guests, and since you've been a guest on the show before, I've got different questions for you.
These always make me nervous, Andy.
All right, so that's part of my fun of doing this. So these are all just sort of rapid fire questions. First one is, in your mind, is it easier to teach a technical non-salesperson how to sell, or teach a salesperson how to sell a technical product?
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. I would say, if I had to pick one, I think it's easier to teach a salesperson how to sell a technical product.
Okay. Next question. What's one non-business book, no business, no sales, that you think every salesperson should read?
Well, it's interesting because that's something I'm about to read soon. Mind Gym.
Mind Gym.
Yes, Mind Gym. GYM.
Oh, Mind Gym.
It's about building your mental strength.
Okay. Mind Gym. All right. And who wrote that? Do you know?
I don't remember the name.
All right, we'll
I think there's a couple of them, but this one has kind of someone in a running position.
All right.
Like out of the starting blocks.
We'll find it. We'll put it on the website so people can see that. All right, Mind Gym. All right, so last question for you. Do you have a favorite quotation or words of wisdom that you live by?
Oh, I do. And my favorite of all time is, and my mind's going blank, but let me think through it real quick.
You would have known it if I hadn't asked it.
Well, I know it, but the first word is
well, you can paraphrase.
Is going past it, but it's courage. I've got it. Courage is not defined by those who fought and did not fall, but by those who fought, fell, and rose again.
Ah, and why is that? What's that say to you?
Well, I think it's twofold. I think, one, it has biblical connotations. I'm a strong Christian myself. And the second thing is, I think that it's one of those things that salespeople and people in general out in the marketplace right now, that they're not going to be successful 100% of the time. And so you've got to be able, I started coaching a select softball team of 9 and 10-year-old girls. One of my daughters plays select softball. And one of the things that we're teaching them about is failure recovery. How quickly can you recover from a failed at bat, from a botched throw? So failure recovery is what that's about.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Well, Doyle, a pleasure to speak with you as always. So tell people how they can find out more about you and Xoombi.
I appreciate it. Yeah, come over to Xoombi.com, Xoombi.com. And the biggest thing that we look for is ideally working with cutting-edge technology in the sales enablement space or training and development space to do marketing campaigns and sales enablement implementations to help you grow your business.
Okay, excellent. Well, good. Well, again, thank you, Doyle. And friends, thank you for spending this time with us. Remember, make it part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And easy way to do that is to join my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Doyle Slayton, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. And if you're enjoying Accelerate and the value we're delivering, then please take a quick minute right now to leave your feedback about this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. It'd be very much appreciated. So thanks again for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.